With The Tonight Show, for 30 years, Johnny Carson dominated late-night TV. All the wit and laughs, or the legendary guests occupying his couch night after night, were watched by millions of viewers. Everybody knew one thing. An appearance on The Carson Show was a make-or-break proposition with respect to a successful career for an act. But what viewers did not know was which guests Johnny enjoyed most in his heart. For years, his personal favorites remained a mystery, tucked away behind that sly smile of his. Of the guests he cherished most, one particular choice left jaws agape. And no, it's not who you'd think it is. Early life and career. Johnny Carson, the future king of late-night television, was born on October 23, 1925, in Corning, Iowa, to Ruth Elizabeth and Homer Lloyd Kit Carson, a manager for a power company. He had one older sister and one younger brother, Richard, who would eventually join him in television. As a child, the family traveled throughout Iowa before eventually moving to Norfolk, Nebraska, when Johnny was 8 years old. That's where his passion for entertaining first began to develop. At age 12, while at a friend's house, he found a book on magic and eventually sent away for a magician's kit. With that set, he practiced card magic day and night, frequently annoying his family by exclaiming, "Pick a card, any card." His mother even made him a cape, and soon he was doing magic tricks in front of audiences. At 14, he began performing as the Great Carson for $3 a show at local clubs. After high school graduation, Carson hitchhiked to Hollywood to follow his dream. He reportedly was once fined $50 for impersonating a midshipman. While this story has often been challenged, when World War II broke out, Carson joined the United States Navy in 1943. He was sent to study at Columbia University and Millsaps College as part of the V-12 Navy College program before being commissioned as an ensign. He served on the USS Pennsylvania as a communications officer, decoding top-secret messages. He was also an amateur boxer with a 15-0-1 record and generally fought on the ship. Later in life, he would say his most proud Navy moment was doing a magic trick for James Forrestal, the Secretary of the Navy. That trick gave him confidence that he could entertain anyone, regardless of how tough the audience was. After the war, Carson used the GI Bill and attended the University of Nebraska. He initially studied journalism, but then switched to speech and drama as he became interested in radio. He even wrote his college thesis about comedy, analyzing radio sketches and how to generate humor. He graduated in 1949 with a degree in radio and speech. He started his career at a local television and radio station in Omaha in 1950, where he immediately showed his talent for quick-witted improvisation. He transferred to Los Angeles, where comedian Red Skelton recognized his potential and gave him a job as a writer. Carson substituted for Skelton one night during a live show, which provided an added boost to his name. Soon enough, Jack Benny asked him to be a guest on his show, foreshadowing a rosy career for the young comedian. He hosted several shows in the 1950s, including The Johnny Carson Show and the game show Who Do You Trust?, on which he first met his future sidekick, Ed McMahon. By 1962, NBC finally won the struggle to persuade Carson to host The Tonight Show. Earlier, he had been somewhat reluctant. This would rewrite television history forever. Carson's feud with Wayne Newton. Back in 1980, Johnny Carson was making headlines not for a humorous monologue, but for a falling out with Wayne Newton. Here's how it went down. Carson was set to purchase the Aladdin Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. But the 11th hour, he withdrew from the deal. A consortium led by Wayne Newton stepped in and bought the property instead. Naturally, the press spun the story as Carson losing the deal, and that did not make him happy. According to attorney Henry Bushkin, Carson grew irked by all the rumors and started making jokes about Newton on The Tonight Show. Those jokes began a feud between the two performers. Newton didn't let it slide. Years later, on Larry King Live, he went off script. Johnny Carson is a mean-spirited human being, and there are people that he has hurt that people will never know about. And for some reason, at some point, he decided to turn that kind of negative attention toward me, and I refused to have it. Newton wasn't all talk. He said later that he visited Carson's office at NBC and told him that unless the joke stopped, he would pummel him. It's a pretty vivid image. Newton confronting Carson, insisting that the jokes cease. The surprising thing is how out of character it was for Carson to find himself in such an overt public battle with someone he had teased. Most of the time, his barb stayed safely within the domain of satire and comedy. But not this time. The Newton confrontation reveals how finely calibrated the scale was between humor and offense, especially when there were large amounts of money, pride, and ego on the line. This feud also reveals something more profound about Carson, his hypersensitivity to image, particularly when he thought he had been cornered by the media. When they implied he lost the Aladdin business, he took it personally. Rather than let it drop, he used his bully pulpit on television to strike back, and Newton struck back. But this isn't good dirt, because this confrontation tells us something about what Carson valued: reputation, respect, and how he was perceived by others. And if somebody crossed a line, real or imagined, he'd strike back in ways involving more than a quick joke. Now, let's unmask those 10 guests who were most loved by Johnny Carson. 1. Steve Martin. Steve Martin was not just another comedian passing by Carson's couch. He actually became a favorite of Carson's. Through the years, Martin had been appearing regularly on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, so often that his name is included among the regulars whom the network still features in its featured guest series. What made Martin such a great fit was his style: slightly wild, slightly crazy, always unexpected. He combined stand-up, banjo playing, offbeat jokes, and even balloon animals in some routines. Carson enjoyed guests who added their own zing, and Martin certainly did. As the official Johnny Carson website states, Steve Martin was more than just a wild and crazy guy. He was a favorite guest of Johnny Carson's. Since he came on so frequently, Martin became one of those guests that the audience looked forward to seeing and hearing from most. When Steve Martin came on, they knew they would have a great time and be surprised. Through the years, Martin's visits became part of the Tonight Show identity. He was not a guest, but a regular treat. And it's telling, too, that in the featured guest DVD set, which collects the most memorable Tonight Show episodes, Martin is one of the names selected for special treatment. That kind of selection doesn't stem from popularity. Rather, it comes from respect and love for what he contributed towards the show. Another hint: viewership often increased with Martin's appearance. His guest spots and interviews lingered in the minds of fans, were posted on highlight reels, and were referenced in anniversary sets of Carson's finest work. You can find most of Martin's Tonight Show segments brought together in a YouTube playlist dedicated to Steve Martin on Johnny Carson. Steve Martin received so many invitations because he wasn't only funny. He was unpredictable, innovative, and someone Carson really enjoyed watching and talking to. For decades, Martin made The Tonight Show more than a talk show. He made it an experience. And that's one of the most obvious indicators that Carson included him among his favorites. 2. David Brenner. David Brenner was one of the names you'd always expect to pop up when Johnny Carson turned on The Tonight Show. He wasn't just a guest once in a while. He showed up more than 150 times during the 1970s and 80s, making him the most frequent guest during Carson's reign. It was his comedic approach that made Brenner unique. He wasn't about outrageous stunts or boisterous jokes. He was all about observational humor, laughing at the kind of things people experience daily but do not often discuss: family foibles, sitting in traffic, growing older, odd news stories, the kind of thing that could be appreciated by millions. Carson obviously loved this arrangement, since Brenner was often asked to get up and do a full comedy routine rather than simply bantering on the couch. His appearances were not just for amusement's sake. They were career boosters. What happened, according to interviews, is that after his first appearance on The Tonight Show in January 1971, Brenner's life changed course. He went from scrapping and nearly broke to buckets of offers, comedy clubs, television work, overnight. Yet another sign that Carson liked him. Carson trusted Brenner enough to let him fill in for him. Brenner guest hosted regularly, about 70 times by some estimates, when Carson wasn't around. This suggests not just that Carson loved Brenner as a comedian. He knew he could count on him to host the show. People close to comedy report that Brenner helped shape late-night humor. Comedian Richard Lewis calls him the godfather of hip observational comedy. He inspired Jerry Seinfeld and Paul Reiser and many more. 3. Rodney Dangerfield. Rodney Dangerfield wasn't just funny. He was unforgettable. His catchphrase, "I don't get no respect," became a part of American comedy heritage. And Carson plainly relished what Dangerfield had to offer The Tonight Show. A measure of how much Carson liked Dangerfield is how frequently Rodney showed up. He showed up on The Tonight Show many times, more than 30 by one count, and always killed, getting up, playing his part, sitting down, and joshing with Carson and Ed McMahon. Viewers never grew tired of him. What distinguished Dangerfield was his manner. Self-deprecating, sharp, relentless with one-liners, and extremely relatable. He made his disrespecting an asset. People watched a man who made light of being second best all the time, being disrespected in small, ridiculous ways, and loved it because it was so universal. Everyone's had a moment when they felt ignored, and Dangerfield made those moments laughable. Carson's responses during Dangerfield's visits also speak volumes. Accounts and videos depict Carson himself laughing hysterically sometimes, perhaps even harder than the audience, and evidently enjoying the repartee. It wasn't all rehearsed bits. Carson would initiate subjects, pose hooks, and frequently act as the straight man admirably to allow Dangerfield's gags to hit the mark. 1980 was Rodney's banner year. His comedy Recording No Respect was a Grammy winner. In addition, the film Caddyshack was released that same year and solidified Dangerfield as more than merely a stand-up legend, but rather a mainstream comedy icon. The Johnny Carson featured guest DVDs make the observation clear. They contain full performances and bonus segments from Rodney at his finest. Carson provided him with spotlight time, which implies respect. 4. Bob Hope. Bob Hope is an American legend. By the time Johnny Carson was the king of late-night television, Hope had already been a household name for decades. Radio, movies, USO tours, you name it. So when Carson began The Tonight Show, having a guest like Hope on the program lent credibility. He was one of the most requested, most recognized visitors ever. According to the archive from the Library of Congress, Bob Hope was seen over 100 times throughout Carson's 30 years on The Tonight Show. That's huge. Fewer comedians or other guests were as frequent. His appearances spanned decades, which is a sign that both NBC and the public considered him somebody special. Despite that frequency, the Carson-Hope relationship wasn't one of easy admiration. In Richard Zoglin's Hope, Entertainer of the Century, and in People magazine, there's a repeated refrain. Carson respected Hope's position in show business, his legacy, but he didn't always get along with the way Hope operated.